I may have predicted a Winnipeg Jets victory over the Penguins on the last episode, but even I didn't expect just how thoroughly of a dominant effort Winnipeg put forth. We'll chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for joining us on tonight's episode. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thanks so much for making us your first listen of the day, every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we are chatting about Winnipeg versus Pittsburgh, and if you told me that two teams were in this game, I wouldn't have believed you. Winnipeg walked in and basically just dragged its skates all over the Penguins' crest. It was not remotely competitive for like 2.5 periods. You want to know the kind of game it was? Kyle Connor had a Gordie Howe hat trick. First career fight, a goal and an assist, and he fought Sidney Crosby. That's the kind of game that this was. The Jets had a bit of a swagger, and it's crazy because it felt like the Jets didn't even have to go full pace in this one. Winnipeg, from puck drop, basically controlled this game, and we'll talk about a couple of real standout moments here in just a brief second. But before we go any further, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, as I just said, Kyle Connor having a Gordie Howe hat trick, I think, really shows just how dominant Winnipeg was. The fact that Kyle Connor even had a fight to begin with is just mind-blowing. Never in my life have I ever seen him fight. This was his first career fight. Never thought he would. If you think a guy like Connor ever drops the gloves, yeah, he just doesn't, right? He ain't a boxer, but you know what? He really answered the bell almost immediately. He got into it with Crosby. And what I think I appreciated, aside from the injury risk, that was a little bit of a concern, but he just seems like he wants to run through a wall for Winnipeg this year, and you love that enthusiasm, right? There's a pep in his step. He's back-checking more aggressively. It just feels like he's really fully bought in. And sure, you probably don't want him fighting and dropping the gloves with a dude who's considerably bigger than he is, but he just really showed that he's got a fearless spirit. And hey, at the end of the day, you really can't hate it. Just felt like a really fun end cap of what's been a really amazing first 20 games for the Jets. And obviously, there's going to be some talk a little bit about, game number 20, the final record that the Jets are at right now. But for this game, I think you just saw a couple of things, right? The first thing is that Winnipeg absolutely suffocated Pittsburgh. There was no room to move. The Penguins kind of look like the Jets when the Jets face a team that really pressures aggressively and shuts down your defensive zone exits. In this case, though, I don't even think the Jets needed to push it at 100%. Pittsburgh's puck management was a complete mess, and it really started off of a very fluky thing in the very beginning of the game. There was like a sequence behind the net where a couple of Penguins sort of mishandled a bit of a pass, maybe bobbled the puck slightly. Appleton pressures with Lowry, and Niederreiter's right there, and somehow Niederreiter basically got a free look at Jari and just sort of tucked it past him. And it was only like 1:20 into the game. Somehow Niederreiter already, putting the Jets up 1-0. And after that, it just felt like the Pens completely came unglued. I said in the last episode that Pittsburgh would be the one coming out playing desperate. And instead, it just looked like they didn't have anything. There was no energy. For most of this game, they just felt like, I don't know, they really had no skating legs. It was like going through mud. There was no enthusiasm, and they just looked defeated. I mean, I see teams like this sometimes. I've seen Winnipeg like this at times when you're in the mud, you're really not getting anything going, you're on a bad streak, and nothing seems to go your way. You just don't have the energy to play, and I think that's what happened to Pittsburgh tonight. They've had a really bad season, and the Jets really just added a little bit of insult to injury. Winnipeg showed why it's the number one ranked team in the league right now, and you look at the shot clock, 30-18. it probably was a little more generous to Pittsburgh than you'd think, right? The one goal that Pittsburgh scored was on a penalty that really shouldn't have happened. Iafallo got called for it, but somehow, bit of a banana peel slip for whoever was going down. I forget if it was Achari or somebody else. But really, other than that blip and maybe the last 10 minutes where the Penguins decided they'd start playing, the Jets basically just ran this game from front to back. I mean, it was pretty thorough, about as complete and almost flawless as it gets for a Jets road performance. Yeah, you could say that there were maybe some turnovers and stuff, but you'd really, really, really have to nitpick, right? And I mean, seriously nitpick. There was just a lot to like about this game. A lot of good second efforts from the Jets. Winnipeg won second chance puck battles. They created good chances on Jari. And really, I think Connor could have had his Gordie Howe hat trick earlier in the game. He was denied on a couple of really good opportunities and just felt like a real big game from the first line, barring one Scheifele turnover where I guess he wanted to maybe make Ehlers feel a little less bad about his egregious turnover the last game. Mark had a rough one that almost cost them. And really, you can probably point to that one blemish from that line, and that was about it. I mean, the top line generally played a really great game, following up this trend recently of where they'll have maybe a bad performance or two, and then they answer the bell the next 4 or 5 games. So, just a really feel-good game. Winnipeg, they're having, truly one of the greatest starts in NHL history, best start in franchise history by like a country mile, one of the best starts in NHL history, if not the best start through the first 20 games. There's just really not much to be upset about. If you're a Jets fan, you're probably living high off the hog. 17-3-0, an incredible performance so far, and the Jets just really seem to, keep a pretty good, pretty consistent level of play. And, if you're looking for some individual highlight moments that are worth watching, I would say go back for the Gabriel Vilardi power play goal. The Jets power play is ranked number 1 this year. I think they're at like 35 or 34%, which is just, can we just talk about how filthy that is? Like a 30+% power play would be really good. Almost getting closer to 40% is just, that's insane. Already 20 games through and you're still knocking them in like that. Just unbelievable. But the Vilardi goal kind of started with this amazing blue line keep from Morrissey. He kind of caught it facing the other direction, did a little bit of a spinorama while getting control of the puck, and in one very fluid motion, passed it down to Connor, and Connor showed excellent patience to outweigh the defenders on the PK and found, Vilardi just alone in the slot. And just like that, within maybe 20 seconds of the power play starting, the Jets added another goal. Nemestikov also scored on his birthday, his 6th goal of the season. This one off of just a second chance effort, scrambling around the goal crease, creating some chaos down low. And it's just stuff that you really like to see. All these, second efforts and things, guys fighting for the puck and really for the crest that they're wearing on their stomachs. Just a feel-good game. This is the kind of performance that this team, is becoming known for. You go on the road, you really walk into somebody else's house and you make it your own. And I think the Jets have done pretty darn good at that this year. And then Kyle Connor completing his Gordie Howe hat trick at the end of the night with, a fun little empty netter assisted by Perfetti and Scheifele. Yeah, what could you even say about this game that I haven't already put out there? Totally fun night, exceptionally great from the Jets. And it just seems to be continuing what has been a beautiful season. Now, was there anyone from the Pittsburgh Penguins that the Jets might be interested in? Probably not, but I do have a soft spot for Puljujarvi. I thought he was noticeable and plays a style of forechecking and skill-based game down low that might actually fit Winnipeg's bottom 6, but I wouldn't go chasing, a big trade for that. Probably a lower round pick or something, but, that's probably a little bit distant in the future. But I did want to take some time to talk about Winnipeg's record through 20 games and why this really feels like a team that should cash it in this year. This squad, I feel, is doing things that we haven't seen from the Jets before. And I think this could be a really, really special season and a time where you want to take advantage of that. So we'll talk about this hot start and what it means for the rest of the year in just a brief second. But before we go too much further, thought you should hear about our friends and partners at Gametime. When it comes to buying tickets, a lot of you are used to adding a ticket to your cart and then getting hit with surprise fees and charges. Nobody likes that. Gametime hates it. They know that when you see that $30 ticket turn into a $60 ticket, you feel a little bit misled. And they want to offer you the option to toggle all-in pricing so you see it up front. You enable it, you see what you're paying without having to go through checkout and getting, a bit discouraged when you're putting your credit card info in. And even better, they have a brand new feature called Gametime Picks that filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats. And if you're wondering if you can actually get a sense of what your seat's like, no problem. They've got seat views before you buy. And of course, they always come back with a lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and so much more. Right now, they even have a special exclusive zone deal for the NHL Winter Classic at Wrigley Field. Go to the Gametime app to purchase tickets and get 10% off bleacher seating and 20 to 25% off on home plate area seats. The only way you can do that right now is by downloading the Gametime app, creating an account, and using code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just kind of coming off the highs of smacking up the Penguins pretty good. The Jets are now 17-3-0, and saying that and reading it still doesn't quite feel real. Teams in the NHL just don't do this. And I don't care if the Jets did this and they sucked, right? I don't care if it was just Hellebuyck carrying the way, that whole stretch. That would be in and of itself like an almost unprecedented feat. But the way that the Jets have won a lot of these games, it feels like every night it's an effort by committee. This team right now, as it is a squad that's showing that it's built to be a true regular season master. And I feel like, coming into this year, I wasn't really sure how all of this would pan out because, running it back, maybe with a few departures and stuff, would you really see this team hit the same heights that it did last year? Especially with the coach who, while he did have a fairly solid interim spell, you didn't really have a great sense for, right? The only other sample size from Arniel was from his Columbus days, and that didn't exactly go well. But in the offseason, I think Scott talked a lot about, growth and what it means to coach at this level and how to be a better person about it. And then, he brings in these assistant coaches, and this team has just hit a new high. And I think the power play has really been a big part of it. You have an absolutely lethal power play that people should be afraid to see. If you see the Jets power play, you're probably expecting to concede. The Jets PK, a little more of a work in progress, but for the most part, I think it does the job. It's at least average. And if that's all that the Jets get out of it, that's like a world apart from where it was last year. But I think what I'm also really appreciating is that the top line, which I've always had some real issues with, it feels like this year you're getting more and more strong efforts out of it, and I don't think it's just a chemistry thing. Some folks said that you wanted to see a bigger sample size. I think we saw a fairly decent sample size last year where they just weren't that good, and I think it was partly a systems thing, right? The way that Bones wants this team to defend as a unit where, you have all in commitment and marking from all five guys, it wasn't really working for this line. The top line is one of those where I think they probably need to cheat a little for offense. And that's okay if you're, responsible enough and if you have some guys behind you on the blue line that can help you in that respect. And so I think one of the things that's really stood out is that you throw in Kyle Connor, who's just really stepped up and elevated his game this year. And it's made a world of difference, right? You can start to rely on him more to do his own kind of stuff, to kind of be more of that transition sort of player. And I think it's really helped pull Vilardi up into the positive area. Scheifele, he's doing well, feeding off of them for the most part. A couple of games where Mark maybe will be a bit behind the pace, but otherwise, he'll also have some shifts where you see him fighting off 2 to 3 defenders in the corners, and he really wants that puck, man. I mean, it's been a much more positive result. Are there scenarios where you're going to have to see Ehlers move up to the first line? Probably. And I think that they'll come against games where maybe the Jets are lacking some pace. Maybe something needs a spark. Maybe you want to send a message. It'll happen. It happens to all the greats, but I have to say I will, give this top line some due credit for improved play from what we've seen in other samples. It could potentially change, and maybe they struggled, further down the road. But for the time being, they've been good enough to where you don't have to worry as often about making a swap. Only in games where maybe, they're spending a period or two chasing the play. But it hasn't really been that much of a concern this year. The depth lines, the Kupari line continues to create lots of opportunities and really just grind down opponents. The Lowry line has had a few struggles recently, but for the most part this year, they have been one of the big breadwinners on the squad, right? A line that continually creates offense, generates offensive zone pressure, just bullies opponents down low, especially against like middle six to bottom six units. The Lowry line just creams them and makes that offensive zone possession a much nicer transition and handoff to your skill lines. The Mesnikov line, I feel like, is a little inconsistent at times on some things, but for the most part, they've been able to really rely on some great finishing and individual skill to kind of make it work, right? Again, I think this team, as it is right now, still has lots of room for growth, but there's a reason that they've managed to accrue a fair few wins. 17 to be exact all the way through your first 20 games is mind-boggling. And are the Jets 17-3-0 good? Perhaps not. I don't know that any team in the NHL has ever been that good through 20 games, because inevitably there are some parts of your team that are going to maybe be a little bit, off here and there in some of these wins, but it doesn't matter. The Jets are already here. They've banked those points. And now that the Jets are pretty firmly entrenched in the playoff spot, they're really fighting for the division crown. I didn't know that they would be doing this year. I don't know that anyone saw it being like this. I thought that they could maybe get up to like third, maybe second place in the Central if things really cut right. But the Jets have basically just curb stomped those expectations, blown them out the door, and said, you know what, we want to pick up where we left off last year, and we want to atone for what we did wrong in the postseason. And so far, the Jets appear to be on a pretty good track towards doing that. There's no team right now that's really playing this well on, this many nights. The Jets are currently 5 points clear of the next closest team, which, can you believe it, is the Minnesota Wild. They are second in the NHL. And yeah, they do have a game in hand on the Jets, so maybe they'll be, 3 points back of them after this coming game. But overall, I mean, wow. You just think about how the Jets have been, how they've climbed to the spot. They've got a chance tomorrow to walk into Nashville and show the Preds why they're at the bottom of the Central and really at the bottom of the league. And you just have this big Jet energy, right? BJE is what I'll call it. Winnipeg feels confident. I feel like they walk into games just expecting to come away with a result. They have the highest scoring offense, not quite as big of a margin, I would say, versus the standing points. 2.5 wins, when you really think about it, is just a crazy amount when you've basically played as many as everyone else has. But offensively, they've only scored, I think, 5 more goals than the next closest team. But having the league's highest finishing offense is just unbelievable. And they've also conceded a fairly few low amount of goals. They're not going to win the Jennings Trophy, I don't think, this year. But I don't really care about that. I care about this team collectively just continuing to dominate, continuing to roll things. And even if this season somehow ends in disaster, I will very much cherish this start. This is a really cool thing. I think it's, very great to take the time to appreciate what a 17-3-0 run is like. And the fact that the Jets have basically locked up a playoff spot before they've even hit anywhere near the mark that you typically would need to be in a postseason position, right? American Thanksgiving is 8 days away, or more like 6 days away now. But that's usually when teams want to firm up the playoff position. Winnipeg, I mean, what are we even talking about, right? They've basically locked it up already. If they went 500 the rest of the way, they would still be, I think, probably within the top three of the division. They have just put on an immense show. I think it's really impressive, and it just doesn't really seem to be slowing down. I mentioned that if they had, a 500 record the rest of the way, that they would still be in like the top three of the division. If my math is right, they would have 96 points. So, yeah, I mean, what do you even say about that? A 96-point team would be just incredible as it is. But the Jets are likely to go over the 100-point mark again, which I really feel like we owe, Bonus a lot of credit for the things that he really got right. The past couple of years obviously did not go well in the playoffs, and I had my criticisms and bones to pick, if you will, but I think he really helped turn this franchise around. He restored the confidence. He got guys to buy in, and Arniel has really felt like he's taken the buck, and he wants to carry it forward in a new direction and put this team on the map. People are getting to really be aware of the Jets. Sometimes they criticize Winnipeg or call us frauds or whatever. They quickly find out that that's probably not really what this team is. But overall, man, what a great run it's been. And I'm just hoping that they can keep it up for as long as possible. Make this start the most insane start in NHL history. Put yourselves in the record books and really immortalize this moment for Jets fans for the rest of their lives. I know I'm never going to forget this start. This team already feels really special to me. And there's a guy that I really want to spend some time talking about because he's going to be in the conversation for the Jack Adams. And who else than, Scott Arniel. We'll talk about why he deserves his roses. And, I have praised him a bit recently, but I'll give him his own segment here in just a sec. Before we dive into what has made his run so special, though, just wanted to let you know about our friends and partners at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. They've also got other sports like NBA, MLB, NHL, college, you name it, they've got you covered. But of course, the NFL right now is getting towards really the prime stretch, right? You've got teams like Pittsburgh, Washington, Baltimore, so many squads out there. Detroit really lobbying for a chance to be a Super Bowl contender. And maybe you're getting a hunch about one of these teams in the middle of the game. You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you're placing your bets. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's all with FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's closing thoughts. As you know what, after a 20-game run with Scott Arniel, I think we can all pretty much say that he's been a fantastic hiring for the Jets. There's really nothing else you could really say about him other than that he has, after maybe some inconsistencies in the first couple of games and some decisions that were a little hard to read into, I think you can pretty confidently say he's become one of the best starts to a Jets hire ever. I don't even know if Paul Maurice had this team clicking as fast as he has. And I think what's been convenient for Arniel is that he was an internal promotion, right? He came in having been the assistant coach, having had familiarity with this team. He had buy-in, apparently. I mean, everyone just seems to love this guy. And what I really appreciate about the Arniel story is that, you've heard people say some really derogatory things about him, and I feel like he just hasn't let that deter him. Commodore's postings about him, some of the Blue Jackets fans, understandably, his stint in previous times did not go well, and he, admitted himself that there were things about his coaching tenure in Columbus that he absolutely regretted. And, he said it forced him to grow as a person. And I think what we're seeing out of him as Jets coach now is a really big reflection of that. I think one of the biggest things that he's shown is a measure of patience and understanding, not just to let things continue to be as they are. he gives guys a chance to kind of work through their problems, but he's also not afraid to send a message if he feels like maybe even the top line isn't performing up to snuff. He's made the Ehlers switch a couple of times already. He even had one scenario where he made the top line skip a shift. And look, I know that it seems kind of small, but when you think about how this top line usually gets treated with kid gloves, it's refreshing to see. But he's also not the kind of guy who's going to like rake them over the coals every single time. He'll have some moments where he'll probably have to, maybe sit a guy down and have them ride pine for a little bit longer. But I feel like he's balanced the reward and the performance very well. And we'll see what happens when this team starts to struggle, because at some point you're going to hit a rut. I mean, it's almost inevitable for most squads. Maybe the Jets are going to be one of the few exceptions where they just never have that downswing. And that'd be kind of sick and also a little bit scary, because sometimes you need to have a little bit of adversity to really find your game. But I feel like the Jets already know what they want their game to be. Arniel has, been given some good advice from whoever referred Davis and Dean to him, and he's really run with the buck. And I feel like, already we're talking about 20 games in the Jack Adams for Arniel. I don't know if there's another coach out there who's got his team playing the way that Arniel does, and who has this, seemingly this great persona. I feel like he's stuck up for his players at times in the right way. He's given some really good thoughts about where, he sees this team's future heading, what he wants to bring into the process. And I feel like he's done a good job of gradually building this team into what it's become a really fun squad to watch. And like the Jets, every night you just expect to win. I haven't had that feeling even with Rick as much. There were times with Bonus where I sort of was like, yeah, this team is overperforming, and you can tell that it's going to end badly in the playoffs. With the Jets right now, I'm not feeling that as much. I think that, a trade or two could really push this team over the edge. You look at the playoff field, and with Arniel having this team already cooking as it is, just imagine what this team could be with maybe one or two major additions, right? Winnipeg is looking at a playoff field right now that's not that thick. And with that in mind, the Jets quite honestly could be one of the true Stanley Cup favorites. They certainly are right now. And in a few months post-trade deadline, I think that's still going to hold. So if ever there was a time to push, the chips in, to bet on Arniel's vision for this team, this might be it. You're not going to have these guys forever. We don't know what's going to happen with Ehlers. And if you have to make him an internal rental, then you'd best darn well make sure that you go out with a bang. And I think the Jets have really deserved it. It's not just bettering the team for the fan experience. The players would also say that they would love to get a big addition, right? This is about giving everyone the best chance to win a ring. And Arniel, if he's the guy to do it for Winnipeg, how could you not love that story? After Maurice said, I hope the Jets win next year, Arniel, an interim coach who kind of got passed around, who kind of was in some ways disparaged by a lot of folks, comes in first year as a full-time head coach for the Jets and wins the cup. What a story that would be. And at that point, whatever happens after that, I frankly wouldn't care. Just winning a title with this team would be unbelievable. It'd be the golden dream, kind of like the Capitals. But what it does feel like is that this team has some of the pieces in motion to do what we've been begging this team to do for years, and that's be a perennial playoff contender. And I feel like this team is learning some good habits. They're developing some good traits. And Arniel feels like, I don't know, whatever early reservations I had about them are starting to fade. He's got this team absolutely singing. And it's great to feel like this team is in the best shape it's been in. And it really started with the Bonus era. It's really continued and escalated. And I can't wait to see what this Jets team becomes over the next few months and years. But we'll have to take our time. It's sometimes not about the destination, but about the journey. And I think this is a journey that all of us are pretty happy to be along. But let me know what you think about Arniel's tenure so far. Drop your comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. We'll see you here next week with coverage of Winnipeg versus Nashville. As I said earlier, I expect to win. Maybe I somehow get proven wrong, but so far the Jets seem to be intent on not losing. So we'll see you then. But for now, thanks for listening. Have a great night, and go Jets go.